as we get through it. So, chapter 6, I guess I need to leave that up there just a second. Tom, can you read verses 1 through 15? I know that's a little bit farther than what the break might be, but 1 through 15, please.
After these things, Jesus went over the sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who has come into the world." Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone.
Thank you so much. So let's just ask some questions to kind of review the story and kind of get it in our mind, and then we'll be looking at application as we look at this. So when we're reading this and looking at this, where do Jesus and his disciples go? Where are they rowing towards? Okay. They're going to Tiberias. They're going to go across the Sea of Galilee. So why do the crowds gather around Jesus there on the other side? That's right. They see the signs. They see the healing of the sick. And so that's a big deal, isn't it? I mean, seeing all that and being amazed with all this. And then we get Philip. What question does Jesus ask Philip? Where are we going to get enough bread? And Philip, he doesn't respond maybe the way that Jesus wants him to respond. How does he feel? How does he respond? We don't have enough money. Does anybody have a note there? Maybe sometimes people will put notes in the Bible how much 200 denarii is worth. Does anybody have a note there how much maybe that is?
Two-thirds of the year.
Yeah. Some people, my note said 8 months of wages. So there's a lot of food. And if you've ever been out to eat lately, you go like, lunch, I remember I would take Linda and the boys and we'd go to a Mexican place, and for $20, man, we were out of there. Everybody ate and was full and was sick full, but now it's 50 or 60, and what's happened? Everything's going up, hasn't it? And so he's looking at this. 8 months of wages is going to cost to get all these people fed. So somebody brings a boy to Jesus. Who brings the boy to Jesus? Andrew. And about how many men are gathered there? About 5,000 men. That's a lot of men all together. And maybe you've been to a game, like a professional game somewhere, and there's 50,000 or 60,000 people. When we went to church in Lubbock, Texas, we went first to one congregation, then to another, and both of them had about 2,500 people. And you're sitting there in this sea of people that just goes on and on and on. And you're like, wow, that's a lot of people. And then that's the men. And, of course, there are probably women and kids there, too. So you're talking a lot of people there. And so what do the people say after eating? What do they say about Jesus? He's truly a prophet. This is the one. This is the prophet who's come into the world. And so what do they want to do with Jesus? Make him king. That'd be exciting, wouldn't it? Oh, we found this guy. He can feed us. We don't have to worry about supplies or anything. So why does Jesus, though, withdraw? Why do you think he withdraws? Yep, he wasn't here to be an earthly king, was he? That's not why he came. And so all that's happening, apart from the resurrection of Jesus, the feeding of the 5,000 is in all four of the Gospels. So these two, the resurrection and this story is in all four of the Gospels. A sign took place during what we call the Galilean ministry. And John's Gospel highlights the attraction of the signs as we go through the signs, the 7 signs, as the reason for the gathering of this crowd, verse 2, when they saw his signs. And this has also provided a chance for Jesus to talk to the crowd the next day and explain that he was the true bread from heaven. And that's going to be getting into next week a little bit. And so the miracle was the background for this discussion about the bread of life. So going back to the story a little bit, what do you think Jesus wants Philip to see? He asks him that question. He says, go buy some bread so that the people may eat. What do you think he wants Philip to see and to understand? He wanted him to have faith in him, faith in God, the ability of God to take care of things. Anything else you're thinking? Philip does not look at the enormous need and see an even bigger God, does he? He sees how much this is going to cost. He does not look at Jesus and acknowledge that he was able to meet every physical hurt, every emotional ache, every spiritual pain. He can't yet look at Jesus and see that he is sufficient to meet whatever need comes up. And so that's what I was mentioning before. It's kind of like they're in a storm a little bit. They might be overwhelmed. They might be thinking, all right, this is going to be exciting. He's going to be the king. I'm going to be on the right hand. You're going to be on the left hand. You could be the minister of this and the minister of that. And they're just all kind of maybe thinking, they're still very physically. But Jesus is talking to them and showing them something else. So in what way are sometimes we like Philip? Or it's easier to answer it this way. How do some people be like, how are they like Philip sometimes?
We can be focused on the physical.
Okay.
Worry instead of trust.
We do worry instead of trust.
You have all these people that follow these mega preachers that are expecting to be taken care of. They see these fake things happen, supposed to be a miracle, which really are not. And that's what they follow, because that's what they're seeking, something like physical, something that we can see, touch, and taste.
We want to fix everything ourselves too, don't we? Oh.
A lot of times we get so wrapped up in ourselves and our own experience that we say God is great and God is all-powerful and can do anything, and yet we may sit and worry about a problem or situation. I don't see how God could possibly fix this. I don't see how God could possibly make this better and make it come out okay. And yet, in this instance, he takes care of the small problem how to feed 5,000 people.
Philip wasn't focusing on God's ability. Rather, he was focusing on, his own ability to fix it. And so we need to, as everybody's saying, we need to think less about how we're going to fix this and keep praying to God for him to fix it, right? Take care of it. We're going through this. The storm is around us. This trouble, these things are happening. We need you to take care of it. However you're going to take care of it. Because we're not here to tell them how to do it. We may have our preference. Here's what I'd like to happen, but, your will be done. Andrew brings this little boy's lunch and places it in Jesus' hand. 5 loaves and 2 fish sound like a pretty good meal for a boy, because we think of bread as, we buy bread, it's sliced in a bag, and this is probably maybe like pita bread size or corn tortilla size, And then the fish, we think, well, he's probably got a couple 5-pounders or something. But the people there, a lot of times, they would catch these little fish and have these little fish, kind of sardine size, and salt them and pickle them and use them as a relish. So, there's not a whole lot there probably. Not a whole lot there. And yet, Jesus takes that and he puts it in his hands, and it just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies till they got all these baskets full left over. And so I wonder, where did the baskets come from? That's my brain going like, where did the baskets come from? But they have all these baskets left over, and they have all this food, and he gives thanks for the food and the women and children and all these people. Huge crowd. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 3. Ephesians chapter 3. There's a couple verses here about God and his ability. Harry, could you read Ephesians 3, 20 and 21? And then Greg, when we get to the next one, I'll have you read 2 Corinthians. Ephesians 3, 20 and 21.
Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, to him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations, forever and ever. Amen.
We know that. We know that verse, but we got to remind ourselves, right? We serve an all-sufficient God. He's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. The boy surrenders his food, but he gets a full meal. And we shouldn't let our lack of resources shake us. We've got to keep our eyes upon Jesus. We've got to put it in his hands. We've got to watch him work, because we serve a very big God, don't we? Let's all turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And verse 8. All right, Greg.
And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work.
We serve an all-sufficient God who's going to be with us and help us through everything. And so Philip needs to see this. We need to see this. They're in this storm of thinking about the physical, thinking about Jesus becoming king, and what that might mean to them and where they're at. And then all this people need fed, and it's just a lot. And so personally, or maybe you're going to tell us about somebody else, but what do we need to surrender to God? What do people need to surrender to God and Jesus? our talent, our finances. Yes, sir. All to Jesus I surrender. Yep, there you go. And all these things, and we could keep adding what those all means, can't we? We need to surrender to him all. Jesus came to be king of our hearts, and he allows the Father's will to rule his life rather than the crowd's whims. And so he's going to withdraw to a solitary place. He's going to withdraw to the mountain, and he puts himself in the hands of God. Anything that you want to mention before we keep going? I don't want to run over anybody. That's yes, sir.
I guess if that first passage we read in Ephesians, it always intrigued me because it was says he's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask and then or think. And that's the part that is really intriguing because it kind of says that, we don't even have the capacity within our own mind to be able to really see all that God is able to do or understand all that he's able to do. And there's another passage in 1 Corinthians 2:9, which says that eye has not seen nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. And it's the same kind of thing in recognizing who God is and how much greater he really is than us. It should cause us to kind of pause and, as you were pointing out, kind of look to him and put our dependence upon him because he is just able to do so much more than we even can imagine that he can do.
Good. Yes, sir.
In both of these passages, both Ephesians and in 2 Corinthians, I think what we fail to see sometimes is that it's not all on God. When it talks about according to the power at work within us, it's not just God doing everything. He's expecting us to be active in this. And in 2 Corinthians, talking about every good work, stuff that we're going to do. So it's not just God going to intervene, take care of everything. No, he's going to give us the power to work his will for him. So it's not all on God. We have a part to play.
Yes, we do. We wish we knew more about that, don't we? We wish we knew more about that power, that strength that he can give us, that power that he can help us with. We know it's there. We know it happens, but we wish he would tell us more about that, don't we? Yes, ma'am.
I think we do, Doug, because I think of Matthew 7 where it talks about he that does the will of the Father. And the things that we mentioned, we talked about finances, those individual things. But we need to be seeking the will of the Father. And we know what the will of the Father is by looking into his word. So therefore, as we obey his commands, obey his word, we're doing his will. And then that enables him to do what he has promised us to do.
Mm-hmm. Because of the power that is within us. We're going to talk about that a little bit in our sermon today. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Anything else? Let's just steal a little bit of Eric's class next week and just look at a couple verses. I'm going to just kind of talk about that, and then we'll jump to the next section. Look at a little bit farther up. Jesus is going to give one of his I am statements. And this is part of what you're going to look at next week. Jesus said to them, verse 35, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. And so he's still giving us this promise, isn't he? He's still giving this promise. And then jump ahead to verse 48. I am the bread of life. And so Jesus is the bread of life. And so study that a little bit for next week, because Eric, I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, and you'll just amaze him because you've already found the answers. But he does give life, right? The life is Jesus himself. He was sent by the Father himself so that he might give life to us. He removes hunger permanently. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. Verse 35, hunger and thirst can be quenched by the spiritual food and spiritual water that Jesus freely gives. The human condition is one of emptiness that can only be addressed by Jesus, and certainly we need that. He can fill that hunger within us. He came from heaven, for the bread of God is that which came down out of heaven. Verse 33, the bread of God endures to eternal life. Jesus came from heaven. He's the bread of life. He's the Messiah. Again, he gives life. He gives eternal life. Verse 51, I am the living bread that came down out of heaven, and if anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And Jesus is saying that the bread that comes down from heaven is his flesh, which was sacrificed on the cross for the entire world. And he gave us flesh in death. Verse 51, and the bread which I give for life, for the life of the world, is my flesh. And so that's where he's going. There's an incident before you get into that, and we're going to look at that to keep in context here, or keep in order. But certainly, he's what we need, and we need to surrender our lives to him, ourselves to him, and let him be the one who leads. Anything else? Yes, sir.
We're speaking of the spiritual end of this, but I'm looking at verse 12. After he fed all these people, then he comes down and says, let nothing be wasted. To me, he's making a lesson on what would be economy and prudence, or sensibility, and also preservation. That, to me, that is an important fact, also.
And the New King James there says that nothing be lost. Yeah. Good. Thank you, Dave. Let's go now to the next set of verses. And Brad, will you mind reading for us verses 16 through 24? Chapter 6, 16 through 24.
When evening came, the disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and went over to Capernaum, and it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose, because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, and drawing near in the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them that is I, do not be afraid. Then they were willing to receive him into the boat, and then immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. On the following day, when the people were standing on the other side of the sea, saw that there was no other boat there except the one that his disciples had entered, and Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, because his disciples had gone away alone. However, other boats came from Tiberias, the place where they ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they also got into the boats and came to Capernaum seeking Jesus. On the other side, they said, Rabbi, when did you come here?
All right, thank you. This is also, you could read the same story in Matthew 14, 22 through 33. So what do the disciples do when evening falls? They get in a boat, right? He tells them to get in a boat, go towards Capernaum. And why does Jesus have them do this? What do you think he needs? He probably needs some time alone, doesn't he? I mean, this is exhausting. I mean, not that God gets tired, but he's man, right? And so he's not only God, he's man. And so I think he needs a little time alone with God. So why is it important to regularly stop and reframe our focus on God? Why do we need to do that? Distractions? Why do we need to stop and reboot sometimes? Yes, sir.
We need to take the Lord's Supper every week. Maybe the same reason.
Yeah. To focus on what's real and important. Our minds get so overloaded every day with the happenings and the concerns that are going on, we lose our focus and begin feeling overwhelmed as if we must do it all on our own. But now these disciples are out there on the Sea of Galilee. What's it like out there? It's stormy, isn't it? Stormy, windy, waves. What do they see in the middle of the night? Yeah, they see Jesus walking on the water, and they're afraid, and they think it's his ghost. They're frightened. It's not like he's just walking on the shore, and they see him over there, and, it's at a level that it kind of looks like he's on the water. No, they really see him walking on the water, and they're afraid. And Matthew and Mark, when they tell us this story, that it tells us that the disciples believed they were seeing a ghost, so they're scared. Jesus reassures them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Jesus is saying, stop being afraid. There was no need for them to be afraid in the presence of Jesus, like we've been talking about. There's no reason to be afraid or overwhelmed in Jesus' presence. We need to surrender to an all-sufficient God. We serve an all-sufficient God. And then, what's Peter want to do? That's right. He wants to go out on the water too. What an opportunity. Can you imagine? None of us have ever walked on water. Jesus did. Peter did, right? And so now he's going to be out there. And so he walks too. However, even though he knows he's serving an all-sufficient God and he sees that, but he takes his eyes off of Jesus, doesn't he? He lets all the winds and the waves overtake him and make him afraid. He's either braver or more reckless than the rest of the disciples. He looks at the boat filling up with water and he steps out of it on top of the water. He wants to be with Jesus. Jesus, come on, come on. And the rest of the disciples, I'm sure, are amazed, one foot after the other. But then he starts going down, but Jesus pulls him back up. That's a picture for us today, isn't it? We could same thing. Help me, help me. I'm drowning in everything. Help me. And he pulls us up. And then Jesus gets in the boat. What happens when Jesus gets in the boat? What do the disciples do? They start worshiping him, don't they? What else could you do? He is all-sufficient. I mean, he is God. He's this all-sufficient God, and he's trying to get this lesson and these storms that are going on around him. And first of all, he takes this little lunch, a couple things of pita bread and some sardines and stuff, and feeds lots of people and has 7 baskets left over. And then he go ahead, get across, and then he comes out to them on the water and walks to them. And even Peter can walk on it for a while. And he is another sign here attesting to his deity, even though John doesn't say this is a sign like he does in verse 2. But it is a miracle. And here are just his close disciples to see. So what lesson do you think that Jesus wants most to impress upon our heart now as we see this too? As we see him walking on the water, as we see Jesus walking on the water, what do you think he wants us to do? I'm hearing it. That's what we need to do too, isn't it? Yes, John. Yep. It isn't just words, it's deeds, isn't it? He's getting them to understand. Pick up your songbook and turn to 195. Is something Ron, I think it's part of another song that Ron puts up there sometimes. So we've heard this, but let's just sing this through a couple times. Again, they've gone through a couple storms. The first one is on the mountainside. It caused the disciples to drown, maybe in visions of earthly power and glory as they looked at people wanting to make Jesus the king. They've taken their eyes off of Jesus, and the desires of the crowd almost devoured them. But Jesus goes away and sends them away. And the second storm of the sea caused their clothes to get wet and their muscles to ache. And Peter, too, took his eyes off of Jesus, was almost swallowed by the water. And now as they sit in the boat, they're sitting there with Jesus. Their eyes are fixed on him. Perhaps softened now by both of these storms, they worship him according to Matthew. Matthew 14:33, truly you are the Son of God. What else are you thinking there? Anything else? Oh, yeah. 6:21, Linda says, notice there another miracle. Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. They're there. Okay. Okay. Gotcha. There they are, where they needed to go. No more rowing. Yes, sir.
All of these things that are happening, obviously, what Jesus is showing them is for who he is, and for them to truly believe that he is the Son of God, that he's capable of great things, and so therefore the trust in him and what he's capable of doing, what he wants them to do, ought to be growing and growing. But, it's also kind of puzzling probably
Yeah.
But that's really where, our understanding of who he is and how much we're willing to put our trust in him, that comes into play.
Very good. One more thing I wanted to look at, it was up there earlier when I put up the mark your Bibles. Let's just look at something. I know I'm going to get into a little bit his next week a little bit right here, but interesting part here in chapter 6, starting with verse 26. Let me read this, and then I'll kind of bring out something that we can think about. Jesus answered them and said, Most assuredly I say to you, seek me, not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on you. Then they said to him, What shall we do that we may work the works of God? And Jesus answered and said to them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent. We're going to focus on that a little bit. Therefore they said to him, What sign will you perform that we may see it and believe it? What work will you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. And then Jesus said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And he said to him, Lord, and they said to him, Lord, give us this bread also. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never trust. And so that's kind of where we're going. But look at that section there, 28 to 29. He emphasizes in verse 27 that we need to labor. And the Jews said, well, how do we do that? How do we work the works of God? How do we do this? Verse 28. And Jesus says, this is the work of God, that you believe, verse 29. We run into many attempts, don't we? People trying to say faith only, but faith is always, we see people with an active faith in the Bible, don't we? And Jesus said that the believing in him is a work. Believing involves yielding to him continuously, coming to him continuously, verse 35, and obeying him continuously. And so all these things are part of that. So just wanted to bring that out. Think about that a little bit. And as verses 28 and 29, 27, 28, and 29, doing the works of God is to believe. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. James chapter 2, isn't it? Yes. Very good. Yes, ma'am. Definitely. That trust, that faith.
And Doug, knowing that that belief entails us doing something, like you mentioned earlier, because sometimes I think we limit ourselves because we say, I believe. But what does that belief bring about in our action, in our lives? What kind of actions follow this kind of belief? You know, so we need to make sure that we don't limit ourselves and go, it says, he that believes and is baptized will be saved. So if I believe what God's word says, then I'm going to do it. I'm not going to just look at it and say, well, I've heard that before, or I already know it, when my actions are totally opposite. I mean, that's unbelief, really.
Yeah. It is. Thank you all.